Warning, viewer discretion is advised. This video consists of talk of rape, murder, and other such topic. If any of this stuff is a trigger, I advise clicking off this video now. Thank you. Everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am the host, ZacGaC, and today we are reading the KFC Massacre. Before we get started, I just want to say, sorry, we still haven't moved from this app. I'm still working on a new way to do videos. But before that happens, I do have a better way of bringing our videos, and you are going to see that right now. In Kilgore, Texas, on September 23rd, 1983, 5 people were abducted from a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. They were driven 18 miles outside town down an oil field back road hidden from sight. There, they were executed. The case became known as the Kentucky Fried Chicken Massacre. It became one of the longest unsolved murders in Texan history. The story begins on a regular day. The Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in Kilgore, Texas, had been open for business. Closing time was fast approaching. The last customers were finishing their meals. The staff were beginning the process of closing down and cleaning all the food stations. Soon enough, they'd be on their way home. Just before closing time, there were 5 people left inside the KFC. They either worked there, or they knew someone working there, or they had arranged to meet another person at that specific restaurant. Either way, they were not expecting to stick around for very long. Here's a picture of all of the suspects. Their names were David Maxwell, 20. Joey Johnson, also 20. Monty Landers, 19. Mary Tyler, 37. And Opie Hughes, 38. Most were employees or former employees, while Monty Landers was a friend of Joey Johnson and David Maxwell. He swung past to visit his friends. None of them could have expected what was about to happen, sorry. As the restaurant was closing down, the door swung open. 3 men pushed inside. What happened next is still a mystery, but we know a few salient facts. The restaurant staff had counted the money. One person called through to the local franchise headquarters and told them the total. Voices in the background indicated that the 30 men may have heard the total. We don't know whether they had planned what happened next, or they were just inspired by the sudden proximity of money. Whatever their motivation was, that phone call was the last time anyone heard any of the victims' voices. Apart, of course, from the 3 men who had barged into the restaurant, no one knew about the murders until the next day. When the young people at the KFC didn't come home that night, their parents were a little worried. But it wasn't unheard of for kids that age to stay out late. For Mary Tyler and Opie Hughes, both in their 30s, being out all night wasn't anything to be alarmed about. But the next day, local police found a murder scene. The bodies were fresh, located in an oil field near Country Road 232. That's a picture of the location. The blood had dried, the flies were beginning to mass. The smell carried on the slight breeze with no landmarks around to hinder it. Right away, the police officers who found the bodies knew something was wrong. They radioed back for backup. The case quickly took on a life of its own. The news flew up in the chain of command. 5 people lay out in an empty oil field. The victims had taken from the KFC. The police labeled it an abduction. Perhaps they had fought back, perhaps they had refused to hand over the money. The restaurant was empty 15 miles away from the oil field where the victims had been taken. Each victim had been shot, execution style, through the back of the head. They were almost lined up as though the killer had taken their time and shot them one by one. One of the bodies had been dragged away. It was Mary Tyler. She was dead, just like the others. But when the body was examined, the police found that she had been raped before being killed. After that, it seemed the killers had vanished without a trace. A quiet night in a fast food joint had turned into a massacre, and police had no leads. The bodies of the victims were taken away to the coroner's office. There they were closely examined for any possible clues. Mary Tyler, the rape victim, was found to have traces of DNA still on her body. When they investigated her background, they found that Mary had been a mother of 3 working in KFC to pay the bills. Suddenly, her kids no longer had a mother. It was a difficult phone call to make. Examinations of the other bodies turned up more clues and hints. On one body, an investigator found a fingernail clipping. It was placed inside a bottle and sent away for testing. There's the clippings. But there were very little else to indicate who might have carried out the murders. Back at the crime scene, the police scoured every inch for clues of evidence. They found very little. The killers had left nothing behind. But then someone spotted something. Spilled blood. It was apart from the body splattered on the ground in such a way that it didn't seem like a spillover from the executions. Someone had wiped it on a napkin, scrunched it up, and thrown it into the undergrowth. Tests and samples were taken and sent off to the lab. But other than that, the police found nothing which could point them towards the potential identity of the killers. The police had a few clues. The DNA from the rape victim, the spilled blood, and the nail clipping. But everywhere else they looked, they came up against dead ends. There were no other witnesses in the restaurant. Report indicated that there might have been a van in the area, one that might have been used to transport the victims from the restaurant to the oil field. But it was too dark, and no one could provide a good description. There were no CCTV cameras in the area. There were no local crime reports or similar attacks in recent history. The 3 men seemed to have come and gone like ghosts, appearing at the KFC, stealing close to $3,000, and then murdering everyone who saw them. The police began to cast their net wider and wider, but they ground to a halt. Nothing they did led them closer to an answer. All they encountered were shadows, rumors, and guesses. None of it could stick in court. Even though it was one of Texas' most brutal mass murders, the KFC Massacre seemed like it would never be solved. But the police never gave up. Even though the KFC Massacre became a cold case, all of the evidence they had was kept on file. Every few years they came back to the case. Every few years they found a new suspect. One of the most promising leads they encountered involved a man named James Earl Mankins Jr. In 1995, the police came across a new name. James Earl Mankins Jr. was a strange suspect. There's a picture. On one hand, he had a string of prior drugs convictions which might point him towards involved in violent crimes. On the other, he was the son of a state representative and possessed considerable resources when it came to keeping the police away from his private life. The police liked him for the killing. He didn't have an alibi, and his profile fit the case. But the only problem was their lack of evidence. Mankins' DNA didn't match any of that found on the crime scene. The key link between him and the murders was apparently the nail clippings which had been found on one of the victims' body. It was almost enough, and the state charged Mankins with 5 counts of capital murder. The case went to pre-trial, and it looked for a moment like the KFC Massacre might actually be solved. But later that year, the charges were dropped. After further testing on the nail clipping, it was decided that it had actually come from one of the victims. Mankins walked the evidence absolving him. The prosecutors eventually acknowledged that he wasn't their man. But Mankins' name would continue to haunt the case. Because the authorities had tried so hard to make the charges stick, and because they failed so resultantly, it seemed like they were grasping at straws. They were desperate. Because of the fiasco with Menkins, it would be hard to make further charges stick. After the charges against William Earl Menkins Jr. were dropped, the case went cold again. It stayed that way for decades. In that time, the newspaper or TV news would run occasional stories, especially when someone had a new theory or the police thought they have a new lead. But nothing ever progressed. Not until November 2005. Then, a DNA match appeared against two men who were already known to the police. Dara Hatfield and Romeo Perkerton were aged 44 and 47, respectively. And there's pictures of them. They were cousins who known each other their whole lives. Hatfield was the key. In 2005, he was serving a life sentence for another crime. He had been convicted of aggravated perjury due to his involvement in another case, but when he was behind bars, his DNA was tested again. This time, it brought up a match. A match with the spilled blood found on a box and on a napkin at the crime scene. It was enough to reopen the case. The prosecutors started to put together everything they needed to ensure Daniel Hatfield and his cousin, who'd been found guilty of the KFC Massacre. By the time Hatfield's case reached court, more than 2 decades had passed since the murders. Due to the notoriety of the crime, the trial had to be moved 100 miles to Bryan. The case rested on the testimony of a Tyler convenience store clerk who said he had been robbed 3 days after the murders. Prosecutors argued that the convenience store robbery and the KFC robbery were remarkably similar, but one had gone tragically. After one argument over whether the testimony could be heard, the judge allowed it. The woman not only testified about the robbery, but she pointed the finger at Daniel Hatfield as the robber. She was the star among only 4 witnesses, as well as testimony from a new deceased Texas Ranger who had worked on the crime scene. Coupled with the DNA evidence, it told the repelling story of a robbery gone wrong. The 3 men had burst into the restaurant demanding the money and then decided to leave no witnesses. They'd driven their victims to an empty oil field and executed them all, raping one of them first. Though the DNA evidence tied both Hatfield and Pinkerton to the case, both men denied being involved. But it was enough to convince the jury. Both men were convicted, narrowly avoiding the death penalty. It brought relief for the victim's family who watched in court. But there was a strange twist to the case. Though one of Texas' most unsolved mysteries had finally been solved, Perkerton and Hattersfield delivered a warning as they were carted away from court. They said that a 3rd man had been there that night. He had been the one who killed the victims. He had been the one who raped Mary Tyler. That's why neither Perkerton nor Hatfield matched the DNA found on the rape victim. The other man was still out there. They warned, but they would not reveal his name. As of this day, the man behind the KFC Massacre might still be walking free. For most people in Kilgore, however, the case now belongs in the past. If you enjoyed this video, please give this a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.